Hey everyone. I want to pick up today where we left off talking about market bouquets. So, as you might recall, one of the first videos that I did was looking at more of the benchmark of where I would be expecting people on my crew to be producing. So, how many bouquets could they be making? And some of the things that would be different from a commercial assembly line system of making bouquets compared to growing on a flower farm, growing seasonally, and presenting, ultimately perhaps a different end product as well. So if you missed that one, be sure to check that one out. There's a lot of really helpful information in there. And the last video that I did was looking more at color. Now, I didn't make market bouquets in that video. I was making a beautiful gift bouquet, but it was looking at ways to approach color and building a color palette a little bit more intuitively. If you missed either one of those videos, make sure you check those out. I think they're both really worthwhile for applying to growing flowers for market bouquets. So we're back in the studio today, and for the time of year, it's actually the start of September here. My kids have gone back to school, so my life has changed. Actually, always a little bit sad about this, but it means that I can dig back into some of these topics, and I'm very keenly aware of the fact that September is really the last month of glory for the flower gardens. It's very apparent to me that the frost is coming. Our frost will be here sometime in early to mid-October, and so I'm very aware of the fact that I'm running out of time to get these videos out to you, and there is so much to get into when talking about speeding up our market bouquets and making them easier, more profitable, more enjoyable. So I'm going to try to chip away on as many of these little topics as possible. So you might recall me saying that by the time I get to my flower table, by the time my flowers are landing on my assembly table, my designing work is basically done already. What that means is that by setting myself up both when I'm ordering seeds and I'm planting my crops, as well as I'm figuring out which flowers to put in my bouquets, by the time they get to my work table, I've done all of that work already. So I've really built the bouquets, they just have to be assembled. So the key takeaway for me in order to accomplish that comes from my work and experience in the commercial scale production of market bouquets is by using recipes, by using bouquet recipes. So a recipe is just a list of the ingredients that are going to be going into a particular bouquet mix. They allow us to then harvest into any sort of scale that we want. They allow us to duplicate our work and create bouquets more in batches. And for me, recipes are something that will save me valuable time. They will save me a lot of brain work when I'm going out into the field. I already know what I'm going to be cutting. I don't have to think when I'm out there. I already have a solid idea of what I'm going to be cutting. So today, what I want to share with you is my take on recipes, what sort of ingredients I'm choosing to put in my market bouquets, and how I've applied the idea of recipes onto producing my own flowers, which, as you probably know, is a challenging thing to do. And we deal with crop failures, we deal with colors not turning out quite as we liked, we deal with forgetting to grow certain things, or all of the above. So I've been looking for ways to approach recipes that give me the structure, to give me the efficiency, but also have the room and flexibility in order to make them fit this setup of growing one's own flowers. So one of the key factors for me on my flower farm is that a flower recipe needs to be able to be repeated as much as possible through the season. I don't want to be rewriting a new recipe every single week, or every single day for that matter, for my market bouquets. So I'm looking for a recipe that's going to be flexible enough and fit my model of growing flowers enough that I can be using the same one week after week as I go out to the field, which means I don't have to rethink. In fact, I can just memorize that recipe, and when I go out, I know what sorts of flowers I'm going to be cutting. One of the keys to building flower recipes is to be looking at flowers not as what they are individually, not looking at them as a dahlia and a sunflower and a snapdragon, but we actually categorize the flowers into groups based on their characteristics. That has been key for me with taking recipe modeling and applying it onto my flower farm, because I'm not the world's best growers. I run into problems. Things change seasonally. The weather is a huge influence from year to year. And so I can't be having a recipe that says 1 dahlia, 2 snapdragons, and 3 status. I need something that's less specific than that. So what I do is I apply the flower categories. So flower categories, you may have heard of them. They are often used by floral designers, and they also get used in the farmer florist and commercial assembly line bouquet world as well. Some of the terms are interchangeable. So one term that is used in both is the term filler flowers, and some of them are used separately. So floral designers will tend to use terms like mass flowers and form flowers, whereas flower farmers may be using other words like airy flowers or disc flowers. But what all of those categories have in common is that they are lumping flowers into groups just to make our lives easier and to help us understand what it is that those particular flowers are bringing into a design. And it helps us to construct designs and recipes and bouquets where we have enough of the various ingredients, the various categories of flowers to create a pleasing design. So they are really helpful. And I know there's quite a few out there. For what I'm doing, I've boiled it down into basically 4 flower categories. So I've got a bucket of flowers here I cut this morning, and I thought I would show you some of the flower categories that I'm using my own flowers that I'll be putting into market bouquets after I finish filming this. So we'll just get these flowers into a better view here. I'm always dealing with lighting in here because I'm backlit in my studio. All right, so my first category that I work off of is the focal flower. So the focal flower is the juicy flower. It's usually the more luxurious flower. It's the big flower with lots of petals, and it's often the one that your eye is going to go to first when you look at a bouquet. But also it tends to be the more expensive flower with the heftier price point. So a classic example of a focal is the dahlia. And I actually grow a lot of dahlias. Mostly this is my focal, taking me from the beginning of June all the way to the first frost. So that for me simplifies focal flowers even further, because I'm not trying to grow a succession of sunflowers or what have you. I just basically rely on dahlias. That takes me through the whole season. Another example of a focal would be a zinnia. And even sunflowers, as I mentioned, so I've got a few sunflowers in here. These are all flowers with large size and multi-petaled, tends to be one flower at the end of a stem. So those would be examples of focals. My second category is the filler. So fillers are flowers that are multi-branched. A great example of a filler flower is the sedum. So it has multiple branches coming up, and it has lots of little florets on top. They can be flat like this. This is a great example of a filler flower. Another one would be yarrow. Achillea is another filler. For me, filler flowers have to bulk up a design. They need to fill that bouquet up quite quickly and bring the size up in the bouquet. Another example of a filler is status. And again, let me get these out. Status is one for me, like the dahlias, that I rely on through the whole summer. They produce really great for me in my climate. I'm somewhat a coastal climate. It's mild here. and the status keep on going. So again, multi-branching. These are a great filler for me, especially now that there are actually really beautiful status colors available and not just the ones I grew up with, which were those neon blue purple ones and kind of the intense colors. So now that I've got some peach and apricot status, I use them even more. And the next category for me is the foliage category. So I think I've mentioned this in the last video I did on the installation, and possibly even before that. This is my new phenomenon for filler. This is tomatillo, and I grew these for the fruits this year to play with the fruits in design. I did not realize that the foliages were so long lasting and indestructible. They don't seem to really get pests. They don't need special care for cutting and conditioning. And so these have been going out in bouquets like crazy. And bonus, they have these adorable little yellow flowers, as I'm sure you're getting tired of me mentioning. So foliages for me are still an important part of making a bouquet. I don't use a lot of foliages. I usually just include 2 or 3 foliages. They help to break up the design. They help to bring size as well as fillers. Sometimes you could just consider fillers and foliages all in the same category for the purpose of a market bouquet. But for me, they're still a distinct category. And when I'm cutting my flowers, I'm specifically trying to get at least a couple of stems of foliage in there to help to bring interest and beautiful texture. I am still a foliage girl. The last category for me is everything else. So all the other flowers are going to go in the last category. The last category is anything that's going to bring interest to the bouquet. So I call it my interest category. It's anything that's going to float out of the bouquet, that's going to float above, that's going to create height in the bouquet and draw the eye down. It's going to create layers and depth. So the classic one, the line flower, and here's a classic line flower, the snapdragon. This is, for me, an interest flower. And that is just because I don't always have snapdragons. Sometimes I deal with thrip on these just way too much, and I don't always have them. And as much as I like a line flower in my bouquet recipe, I need to be able to go out and create bouquets just based on what I can actually grow and grow well. So I can't be panicking if I just don't have any snapdragons or other line flowers. And so I've just lumped those together because I find that flowers like cosmos will create a similar interest. They can extend out of the bouquet. I find that anything that's really working in that negative space arena is going to work for me for my interest factor. Even grasses are great, just anything that brings some light texture, some airiness. So that's why I lump them all together, just for the purpose of being, realistic on growing all of this stuff. That just makes it easier and also faster for me when I'm going out to cut. Another one in my interest category this week is these little straw flowers. They're just bringing some accent to the bouquet. So that is how I roll. And what I'm doing when I'm pulling these, my usual target is about 12 stems, plus or minus a couple stems. It really depends on where the cost is at and how big they are. And so it does depend a little bit through the season, but I'm going for about a dozen stems for my market bouquet. And what that entails is usually I have 1 to 3 focal flowers. I will have 2 to 4 of the filler flowers. And by the way, I pointed at sedum earlier, but sedum is one of my all-time filler flowers because they can be used when they are green, when they first start in the spring, all the way through the season, and they hold perfectly well on the plant as they change. So right now they're starting to blush up. Earlier they were green. They are great for bulking up. They add a beautiful texture, quite a neutral color for most of the year as well. And that is a perennial that I can't live without. So if you're looking for easy, no nonsense fillers that will just come back every year, sedum has to be on that list. So I'm growing 2 to 4 fillers, and then for foliage, as I mentioned, I'll just usually have 2 or 3. And then for the rest, for the interest, it's anywhere from 2 to 4 stems of interest flowers. Now, I do want to mention if I'm including cosmos, one stem for me is more than one stem of cosmos. That is because cosmos is best when it's going out in bud form. And so I like to include lots of buds because the buds will actually bloom in my customers' vase. And so I don't want to just include an open cosmos. I want lots of stages because then I will actually give them a long-lasting bouquet as opposed to just an open cosmos that just will only last a few days. So just a tip for you, but also just being completely transparent about where my stem counts are. To me, cosmos, depending on how many branches there are on one piece, I might be putting up to 3 pieces in a bouquet and counting it as one. So there you go. So when we're making a recipe, what we really need to be doing is trying to strike a balance between the different proportions of each of those categories. And it kind of has to start with the price point, right? Like we can't just write a recipe willy-nilly. We have to have some sort of guideline or target of what are we trying to do and accomplish with this recipe. So for me, when I first started out, I tried a few different price points on my flower stand to figure out what went well, what was more profitable, what did I want to focus on. And from what I hear, that price point is going to be different for everyone in various locations. So it's worth just trying out. In terms of the price point, once we have it, we can just slot our stems into that bouquet recipe based on the price. So each of the flower types has its own value. It will have a price, and you can do a little bit of research for figuring out your own stem prices for flowers. I would recommend having a look first as locally as possible that you can, from farmer florists to wholesalers. Anything that's local to you is going to be more helpful than something that's farther away, which is why I can't tell you what you should charge for your bouquet, because we're all in different area. And we also have different business costs associated with our businesses. So you really have to do a little bit of that homework and figure some of that stuff out yourself. And then what I've further done with making market bouquets is I don't want to spend time actually pricing that out constantly. I don't want to spend time with my recipe fitting things in and pricing them out every single week. Again, I just want to repeat this recipe over and over. So I will figure out sort of an average price for my focal flowers, from my peonies in the spring through to my dahlias. What's the average price? And I will be working my recipe based on that. So if there is a little bit of change week to week from the profitability, that is just something that I'm not concerned about, because the efficiency that it gives me from week to week. I will also round numbers up and down and lump flower prices together. I want to work with 1s and 2s and 3s is what I'm saying. 4s and 5s, I don't want to work with $1.50, $1.75. So I find it a lot more efficient just to do that and then run with that through the whole season. So that's enough about pricing. Pricing is so nuanced. It is so complex. So as I mentioned, when I'm building my recipe, I'm looking at the proportions of each of those categories to try to create a bouquet that's beautiful, but that also has the size that it reflects what it is that a customer is paying for it. So there's a big difference between putting a bouquet together with a whole bunch of focal flowers versus mixing a bouquet with other fillers that are less expensive. A bouquet of 10 stems of dahlias would be at least $40 from me, but it may not look like $40, right? But $40 worth of these flowers, for my customer, their perception of the value, it'll be a lot larger, a much bigger bouquet. So that is a part of building recipes, as I mentioned, the proportions of each thing that are going to help us create that perceived value for our customers and retain our profitability as best we can. So I'm going to get these flowers into some bouquets now. I have my bouquet ingredients laid out, and I didn't show you every single one, I realized, so I'm just going to go over this one more time with you now that they're all sorted out. So I've got 13 stems total for these bouquets. I have enough for 3 bouquets laid out on my table, just 3. I have 3 focals. So I have the dahlia, the sunflower, and I have the little zinnias. Normally, I typically mostly do 2 or even just 1 large dahlia or 2 focals, sometimes 2 dahlias, but these sunflowers were cute. They're just too cute. So they're going in. I don't grow a lot of sunflowers and they just happen to be ready. For the filler category, I have 3 stems of filler. So I have 1 stem of sedum. And by the way, this is like a black sedum. Not an Autumn Joy. I love this. And 2 stems of Status. For the foliage category, I have 2 stems of Tomatillo, and I have 1 stem of Daucus Dara, which includes one of the pods, which is like ultimately why I grow this flower. I love these pods. And also one of the little florets. I include this as a foliage. And for the everything else category, for the interest, I have 1 Snapdragon. I have 2 Amaranthus. Now, I'm treating these as an interest because there's a line here that's going to extend out of my bouquet and give it depth and draw the eye down. That is why they're in that category. And the other one is the straw flower. Okay, so 4 actually in the interest category, to a total of 13 stems. All right, so let me put these together. I actually lost my other camera right now. It got too hot. It is hot in here. So I'll just show you on the tabletop. Sorry about that. I actually have to go pick my kids up from school in like 10 minutes. So I just need to whip these up at this point. And as usual, just putting my stems in on an angle to achieve the beautiful spiral. There are other ways to do bouquets as well that are quick, but you don't get your spiral. And so that is our market bouquet done. I left my favorite cutters out in the garden, so we'll see how I do here. So chop, chop, chop. And tie those off. Great way to bring fall attitude to a bouquet, the Amaranthus. So I'm starting with an X with 2 of my line flowers, just laying my stems in, flip, flip, flip. We don't want to be here all day for a market bouquet. Normally I don't cut right over my table like that, but I realize otherwise you can't see what I'm doing. I swear, technology and me on YouTube technology has not been my friend. I struggle so much with filming sometimes, and it's always when things decide to poop out on me. Last one. Now that my table is all messy. Oh, it looks like I forgot a zinnia on one of those. Not the best cutters, guys. I have some of these sort of ones around because my kids help me, and I have lost so many good cutters. One of my favorite pairs from Holland disappeared once. And so my kids get to use those ones. They can get a little beat up and I don't have to worry about it. So I missed a zinnia. No problem. Pull that one bouquet out and just loosen that tie. And because everything's gone in on an angle, it's just a simple matter of slipping that one in. And retying it, and we're done. All right, so there we go. All done. I hope that helps to illuminate my approach to market bouquets and answer some of your questions. Of course, there's a lot more to share, and I will be back with more. In the meantime, let me know if you have any further questions sparked from this video. Thanks for being here, and I will see you next time.